What does America do when she no longer needs her slaves or surplus workers? The 1880s Reconstruction era was the first time in our history that America had seen a large surplus of non-white labor. In the 1870s, many former slaves were integrated into the labor force, but white backlash in the 1880s and 1890s led to a permanent underclass through nearly a century of separate but equal, courtesy of the Supreme Court. For very different reasons, there was a similar surplus of white labor in the early 1930s. So regardless of race, capitalism runs in cycles. In fact, it's called the business cycle. There are up times when there are jobs for everybody, labor market's tight, pay rises. And there are down times when the economy has a surplus of workers, falling wages, and a high level of unemployment. We saw this cycle during the boom and bust of the Roaring '20s and the stock market crash and Great Depression of the 1930s. After that crash, nearly a third of American workers couldn't find a job, and the numbers were far worse in minority communities. Our economy couldn't put people to work because capitalism had failed. So what do you do with all those extra workers who can't find a job? In the 1920s and the 1930s, that very question was the subject of a clear and open disagreement between Democrats and Republicans. Herbert Hoover and the Republicans believed that when capitalism fails and you have high unemployment, you do nothing. You wait for the free market to magically fix things and for capitalism to right the ship. FDR and the Democrats, on the other hand, believed that the Republicans' benign indifference was the completely wrong approach. Instead, FDR said that it's the responsibility of government to put people back to work during times of high unemployment when capitalism has failed. He enacted his New Deal. He put Americans back to work, planting trees and forests, building schools, improving the nation's infrastructure. 12 million Americans who'd been unemployed for years went back to work, and capitalism was rebooted in the United States. For much of the 20th century, Hoover's and FDR's approaches represented the two sides of the debate about what to do with surplus workers: ignore them or have the government hire them. That is, up until 1980. In 1980, the Republicans said you waited for the market to absorb the surplus of workers, while Democrats said that you proactively used the powers of government to put Americans back to work. But then Ronald Reagan came to Washington, and everything changed. When Reagan stepped foot in the White House, he said that the job of government was not just to ignore the surplus of workers, but to figure out a way to make a buck off them. Reagan lived by the notion that profit was king. If America's business people always and only did whatever made them the most money, that would magically cure all ills with supply-side fairy dust. He fundamentally changed the way that America deals with surplus workers. Instead of ignoring them, Herbert Hoover's old way, or having the government put them to work, FDR's old way, there was now a third option: make a profit off them. There's a variety of ways capitalists make a profit off poor and unemployed people, from payday lenders to rent-to-own furniture stores, to the most radical of them all, turn them into prisoners. That latter is the most radical and has turned out to be the most profitable for America's capitalists. It's almost elegant in its simplicity. Turn unemployed Americans into criminals. Track them, punish them for any crime possible, take away their rights, and throw them into for-profit prisons. Once thrown inside a for-profit prison, an inmate needs food, housing, health care, and other services, which is hugely profitable for the capitalists running the prisons. They're raking in tens of thousands of dollars per prisoner per year, hundreds of % more than Roosevelt paid to simply put them back to work. And turning unemployed Americans into very profitable prisoners is a booming business. From the beginning of America until 1980, the incarceration rate in America remained fairly steady. When Nixon declared his war on drugs, right here, it did slightly increase the incarceration rate in the United States, but that increase was nothing dramatic. But then Reagan came into office in 1980. And he and his buddies realized that they could make a buck off unemployed Americans. The nation's incarceration rate took off like a rocket, thanks to Reagan elevating profit to a religion. Between 1980 and 2009, the state and federal prison population in the U.S. increased by over 700%. Since the for-profit prison industry started aggressively buying congressmen 15 years ago, the number of people thrown into for-profit prisons has also exploded. And Americans sitting in jail make a very exploitable, very profitable, slave-like labor force. According to the Prison Policy Initiative, the minimum wage for a prisoner who works in the UNICOR program, that's the federal government's prison industries program, the minimum wage is 23 cents an hour. The maximum wage. The maximum UNICOR wage is $1.15 an hour. Across all state prisons, the average minimum wage for prisoners for non-industrial work is 93 cents an hour. And some states like Georgia and Texas are completely upfront about their slave labor camps. They pay absolutely nothing to prisoners. Because the Reagan Revolution changed America's value system, we stopped asking the question, what's the best way to deal with surplus workers? Instead, we started asking, how can we make money off surplus workers? The logical answer was a return to slavery, and it's been embraced by capitalists with a vengeance. And that is insane brutality.